Welcome to this edition of In-Depth Alaska. I'm Lauren Maxwell. Recently, I sat down with Thea Agnew Bemben. She's a special assistant to Mayor LaFrance working on homelessness. We spoke about the administration's plans to deal with homelessness in Anchorage.
My name's Thea Agnew Bemben. I'm one of the special assistants to Mayor LaFrance, and I'm working on homelessness and health.
Okay, and I know that one of the priorities of the administration is to try to make a significant dent in homelessness. And I know you're relatively new on this, but do you sense that we're making some strides that way?
Yeah, I think we're incredibly well poised to make a big impact. The reason that I took this opportunity is because that's my goal, and that's the goal of the team and the mayor. I think it's been very clear from the beginning of the administration that that's a top priority, and that's really being driven by the amount of public input and input from the business community that we're hearing that this is a top issue.
And so I know there's some things that you have to do, and one of them is providing winter shelter. That's a priority, I would guess, this time of year. Is that right?
Yes.
Give us sort of an overview on what winter shelter looks like this year, if there's anything different from last year.
Yeah, one thing I want to share in regard to that is that we do have community nonprofits that provide year-round shelter. Anchorage actually has about 1,000 beds of emergency shelter that's being provided by our nonprofit community that isn't necessarily funded through the municipality. The municipality has a responsibility to bring on some additional shelter during the coldest part of the winter, and that's of course a necessity because our top priority is to have safe trails, safe spaces, and safety for people who are unsheltered. So right now what we're working on with the Anchorage Health Department and the rest of the municipal teams that are involved with purchasing and other folks is to find contractors and secure contracts for both continuing the congregate shelter that the municipality has been supporting. That's actually been open all summer, 200 beds there. So will continue, of course. And then we've also received some state funding to help support that facility. And then also bringing on some what we call non-congregate shelter. So that's shelter in more of a scattered site approach where people have more privacy. And we're hoping to bring on about 400 beds of non-congregate shelter.
And that's actually a little bit less than last year. I believe it was about 500 beds. Can you talk a little bit about how many folks you believe are currently unsheltered in Anchorage and kind of where you come up with those numbers?
Yeah, so the estimate that the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness has given us that we've been working from is between 400 and 500 people who are unsheltered. That's not the total number of people experiencing homelessness in Anchorage, but it is the number that we estimate are unsheltered going into the winter. So that's been our working estimate. We did start off thinking about 500 beds of non-congregate, but as we have been developing our strategy and getting input from partners and community members, we heard loud and clear that people really also want to support what's called rapid rehousing, that's where we kind of help people move straight into housing with some supports, both financial and otherwise, that tapers down over a 12-month period. So that's the kind of support that helps people move into housing, get benefits, employment, healthcare services, and then be kind of on the path to independence. You might have heard of the Next Step program that the coalition has been running and has had a lot of success with. That's the type of support that we're hoping to bring on. It probably won't be 100 slots of that, maybe closer to 75. We're still working out the number on that.
So I saw in the mayor's proposed operating budget for 2025 that includes $2 million to move people from homelessness into housing. Is that for the rapid housing model that you just mentioned?
That's part of this whole funding package. So that we have congregate, non-congregate shelter. We have some rapid rehousing that we're budgeting for. We also will be bringing online some warming shelters for the coldest part of the winter. Another thing that we're really focused on, you may have heard Farina Brown, one of the other special assistants, both she and I are working very closely together. We both have a lot of experience with the behavioral health sector, and we're really trying to connect the providers in that area who provide all sorts of community behavioral health services better to people who are experiencing both unsheltered and homelessness, but also those who are in shelter, because access to health care and really getting those unmet health needs addressed is a critical piece for people being able to gain more stability and to be able to succeed in housing. So that's another part that we're bringing to the table, as well as really trying to work closely with our outreach partners and also different kinds of navigation that exist in our community to give people that support as they move through the steps towards stability.
So is there funding that the city is providing to try to, I'm just curious about that approach, how you're doing it, to provide more navigators, or how are you connecting people in this way?
We already do have some funding that's been allocated towards some of those contracts, but a lot of it is really through providers that offer services that for people who are eligible can be billable services. So some of it'll be a combination of some muni funds for some of those services, and for others it's more about us making those linkages with the contractors that'll be delivering.
More or less?
Well,
or,
I mean, let's be clear that that's case management's always part of our congregate and non-congregate shelter services that the municipality contracts for. So the people that have been working at 56th Avenue are doing that kind of case management in terms of connecting people up with getting their IDs, getting applied for benefits, getting on lists for housing, that type of work. That is very important and necessary. There's really another level of that type of what we call peer support and case management that's really a community behavioral health service. And that, as many people know, is not as easy to connect with as we wish that it was. And so what we've been doing, we've already hosted a couple work groups with our providers in Anchorage. We have another one coming up in a couple of weeks. We're really trying to map out a pathway so that for different people who are in different types of situations, whether you're a single person who's unsheltered or perhaps a family that's couch surfing, but somebody in your household needs those services, how do we make those linkages happen for people so that they can really get that access to care? So that's what we're kind of layering on that hasn't always been as accessible as we wish that it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What else do you perceive as new that the administration is working on in this area?
I mean, honestly, I think the biggest improvement will be, and this sounds a little bit wonky, I think, but really in coordination. So the municipality has a really strong role to play with the funding that we're allocating towards these contracts and these services, and in the ability to convene and bring, whether they're social services providers, healthcare services, behavioral health providers together. We can really use our funding to orchestrate the bunch. And so part of it is actually working internally. So there's some really great relationships forming now between APD, parks, the health department, the fire department, all of our behavioral health crisis services, our safety patrol. Those are all resources that municipality is funding, and it's really our job to make sure that those are absolutely optimized, both for the people that they're intended to serve and for our taxpayers in the municipality. So that's a big role of this office, and why we have 2 special assistants dedicated to this area of work. I think another thing that we can really do is help bring in other community partners. So whether that's other funders or to assist with advocacy, there's a lot of work we need to do with our state partners to get the support from them that's needed for our community. And with federal partners, I think there's another layer of really bringing in new funding to fund this work. So there's a lot of federal grant funds that we're not tapping. The mayor has identified a grants team that will be hopefully working soon to really kind of bring some of that new money in, because most communities of the size of Anchorage are massively leveraging our, the kind of local resources with federal funding, and we've really not been doing that. And that's, I think, something that, again, I think we have a responsibility to the residents of Anchorage to really bring in as much resources as we can.
One thing I noticed on some list was talking about, well, the mayor's proposed budget as well, is more money for camp cleanup. Mm-hmm. And also some redefining or refining of abatement policies. I don't know if those have changed at all. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the abatement policies have changed. I think, again, we have some really great collaboration happening, but again, between APD, parks, the legal department, our outreach partners to really try and make sure that we're doing abatement in a way that is very respectful and that provides supports to people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and having their the location where they're living removed, but at the same time really respecting the other neighbors in Anchorage who want to use parks, want to use public spaces, and are finding that they're feeling unsafe and not able to do that because of people living in those areas. So we're trying to take a very responsive approach. We don't have unlimited resources to do that. So we're again trying to use the prioritization that's in code to make sure that we're prioritizing places for abatement based on that legal basis, and then also to address communities where we've had unsheltered homelessness that's lingered for a long time. So there are some parts of the community that have had significant unsheltered camping in their areas for like 1 to 2 years. And so we're looking to really address the needs of those communities as well. And that's part of the importance of bringing on additional shelter beds right now, is that we absolutely don't want to displace people who are unsheltered and not have a place for them to go. So we're trying to coordinate those things so that there's locations for people to move into.
That's what I was going to ask you. Will we see more abatements? Will it get a little easier or perhaps a little faster when we have some of these other shelter beds open in the hotels?
I mean,
whatever?
I think there's really great resources on the municipal website to look. You can look at an interactive map that shows the locations of camps that residents have reported, and then abatement activities over time. You can also look at cleaning. So I just want to be clear that the Parks Department, the Healthy Spaces team, is an amazing group of people, and they assist with abatements, but what they're doing probably right now as we sit here is they are all over our community picking up trash, cleaning parks, and that's not just because areas that are experiencing camping, but also just from all of us creating garbage. So they are doing that work day in and day out, as well as when there is an abatement of a camp, they assist with that process there.
I guess I also wondered, actually, what did I wonder? Oh, I know. You mentioned warming centers, so that's in the plan at some point where people can park their vehicles. Is there a plan? You know, we've seen some of that get a little out of control. Is there a plan for places where people may be able to live in their vehicles or even camp safely?
Yeah, so that's a really big topic of discussion. We've had a lot of discussion about that. We absolutely have it in our strategy for next spring to try and identify some legal parking areas for people. Where the municipality is funding shelter, we also are working with those contractors to make sure there's a space for people to park their vehicle and not sleep in it during the winter months, because that is not safe, but to be able to use the shelter and have a place to park their vehicle so that they can keep their vehicle. And then as far as where people are parking in areas, you know, in the right of way, for example, that's really the role of APD to address that the way they would, you know, if my car broke down and I left it on a road. So the APD has a process for doing that, and that's what we're using for that.
Do you think there is a role for sanctioned camping anywhere?
The way that I think it's important to use the right terms there. I do not think that camping is a safe way for anyone in Anchorage to live long term. It's very unsafe for people living in camps. We have a lot of data that shows how much victimization occurs. I'd say especially for women, but I'm sure for men experience other types. It's also very unsafe in our community to camp for reasons of wildlife. We have a lot of reports and have spoken with the state about the way that bears interact with campers. It's not safe at all. It's also isn't safe in terms of public health. So if you don't have access to sanitation, clean water, a way to store your food, that's physically unsafe. So what we are very interested in doing, however, is understanding that there are certain people who have barriers to using the type of shelter that's been available. Congregate spaces are very difficult for somebody who has a mental illness or anyone who can't tolerate that level of stimulation, and it also can feel like a very unsafe space for some people, even though, of course, our operators try and maintain a really safe space. So, and then non-congregate can be very helpful. Next Step, for example, has had great success with moving people from non-congregate to housing. But if you're, again, somebody who perhaps has behavioral health issues or other reasons why being alone in a hotel room would be difficult, that's also not going to be a great spot. So what we're really working on right now, and especially we'll be sharing plans and having conversations over the winter, is what kinds of very low barrier shelter could we stand up in the spring that could use different technologies. There's a lot of great modular buildings or pallet shelters, that type of thing, that could create a space where we have an even lower barrier to entry for people, but it's a safe, contained environment that has sanitation and the other things, and could be a place where health services and supports are brought to people there with the goal of moving them into more permanent housing and supports.
Oh, so perhaps like a tiny home village, more or less, where they could stay as transitional housing?
Exactly. Like some people are interested in doing tiny home villages for permanent housing, which is great. And we're exploring concepts. And this concept came up last summer. The Assembly had a sanctioned camping task force. And that task force produced a report that's still on the Muni website that identified some really great technologies and also potential locations. So we're very interested in kind of reviewing those results. We've also been getting some great input from community members that are super interested in this idea. There's also a HUD funding opportunity that the city is, or the municipality is partnering with the university and others to apply for, that would also look at modular and manufactured housing types that are appropriate for our environment. And that could be for more permanent housing, or we're very interested in seeing if there's options that could be used more for shelter.
Okay. I was going to just say that's really all that I was going to ask you. Is there anything that you'd just like to say to people in particular? I know this is a frustrating problem for many folks who are experiencing homelessness and who are living with people around people who are experiencing homelessness. Is there anything that you'd like to just sort of say to the public?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that, I think so this is the first time I've been part of a public sector position. So I've always worked with organizations like the municipality, but from a private sector point of view. And coming on to the inside, the thing that is just incredibly visible to me is how many excellent people there are working at APD, at the fire department, at the health department, at, in this building doing purchasing and HR. And everyone is here because they really care about Anchorage. They really care about the people who live here. Our mayor is, I think, setting a great example as a leader by coming forward as somebody who wants to be honest, who wants to listen and learn and work together to create solutions. That's what this whole team here is doing. And I think that's a wonderful invitation to all sorts of community members who belong to a faith community, or they are part of their community council, or they're the president of their homeowners association, or they're just a person who's interested to come forward with ideas. There's so many things we all can do. There's so many people already doing great things. People get together and pick up trash around their neighborhoods. I think it'd be wonderful if we did some walks like on our trails. And, I just think there's countless opportunities for us to get together, make meals, put some helping handbags together that you can distribute to people who are outside. The more we can really get in touch with each other as people and not see people experiencing homelessness as an other that we need to shun, but more like, how can we engage? That said, I also want to be clear that we're hearing a lot of reports from people who do not feel safe in their neighborhoods. They're experiencing crime. That's a terrible feeling. I have 2 kids here. I grew up here. I'm raising my kids here, with my husband, and nobody wants to feel unsafe going to the grocery store. So those are things we absolutely need to address at the same time as really respecting the dignity of all of our neighbors and trying to provide whatever help we can to move people into a more stable situation.
All right. Well, thank you for talking with us today.
Thanks so much.
That's our podcast. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe.